Got it.
Got it.
Yes, sirree. Welcome to another official Sunday Live chat. And it's good to be back here with a good buddy of mine, welcoming back for the second time, Mr. Don Gordon. Don, so good to see you.
And you too. It's been, God, 2 years, I think, since we last chatted.
3
Three? Whoa.
September 2020, we did our chat.
Wow. I
I
mean,
know
it's
it's
amazing. Just time just flashes.
it really is going by a little bit too fast, and it starts to concern me because a lot of us like didn't do anything um, since 2019, early 2020.
Mm.
Some of the things we haven't done since then are now it's now coming up on 4 years,
Yeah.
and and you're going places and you'd be like, I haven't seen you in years. It'd be like you wouldn't believe how many places there are left on the earth that I'm going to be saying that. But
Yeah.
what's really interesting is that I remember when we first checked in, it was kind of like COVID had, it was kind of like here, and you were dealing with it, and you had just done a recent move to Spain
Mm.
and all the way from Vietnam. And I was super interested in all these discussions about your life and how you do all these things, and it's super cool. But now that you've had like 3 years of settling into life there, how's it been?
It's a radical change, obviously, from Southeast Asia. But and it was an interesting transition because I got here, and then within a few months, the COVID thing happened, and all the other stuff that sort of rolled out after. So it's been even though in some ways, like it seems like I haven't been able to get as many things done as I'd like to. There still has been a lot of stuff going on, but they're sort of smaller rather than the big things. I mean, I haven't done as much traveling as I would have liked to and things like that. But it's allowed me other opportunities to get into that I never would have had the opportunity back in Vietnam because I was so busy with the work I was doing there that it just didn't give me an opportunity to really focus on music or other stuff that you're going. I'd really like to try this, and it's like, nope, that's not going to happen.
Man, I always, whenever I think about somebody that lives in, I think we've discussed this before, but it's been a while. Like, I just love the idea how you plunge yourself into change and embrace change in the way that you do. And I'm super interested to hear about what you've discovered moving to Spain, particularly southern Spain where you live, and the interest that it's perked up. Like what changes in your life after living in Vietnam for what, 20 years you lived there?
Yeah, just under 20 years, yeah.
That's
And,
amazing.
and I mean, and the Vietnam thing as well was it wasn't specifically planned because we were there as tourists back in '98, I believe it was, and really fell in love with the place. But as tourists, and after that trip, we moved to London for a while, and then Madeline got a job opportunity down in Saigon for a contract, and so she went down there while I stayed in London, and I finished off the Halogen project and went down, and it was one of those right time, right place. .com was happening, the boom, the investment money, and you're there for a few weeks, and suddenly people are offering you positions, and so I think the big and the thing, and that was the big thing that I learned about myself at that point is that you have to be willing to say, okay, I'm just going to cut the rope and do something completely different because we're all so heavily embedded in the things that we've done. It's very hard sometimes to just sort of give up and say, okay, I'm going to move someplace different, or oh, I'm going to change my career path, or oh, I'm going to do this. And I think if one gets the opportunity to do that, because obviously not everybody gets that opportunity, you have to decide that, yeah, I'm going to take this chance and see what happens. And at the same time, we're fortunate because, we don't have kids and things like that. So we're not, tied to a lot of things that, for some people are, very high priorities in their life. So, it's and, the Spain has been a constant in my partner's life for years because she partially grew up here. So coming here was a kind of an obvious transition, if you will, and you know, and has had its own set of surprises as well, which has been fascinating and just learning things. You know, as we sort of as we were sending some messages back and forth, I was saying more recently I've gotten into sort of history in a way that I hadn't previously.
I can only imagine. So
And
what doors are you unlocking then?
oh no, and it's just it's weird things. So you start to go, okay, so here I am living in this you know small city down in Andalusia, and it's like, what can I find out about the place? And then you start digging, and you realize, oh damn, this place was originally a Phoenician colony back in 770 BC. You go,
Classic.
man, that's a long time, you know. And so
Yeah.
you start digging into that, and that opens up things. And then, you know, and then I'm sort of jokingly say it's like, there's not too many places where you can sort of walk down the street and go, oh look, there's part of an old Roman amphitheater, and right above it is a Moorish fortress and castle, you know, from the 14th century. It's like, that's a lot of history right in your face.
That's I don't know. I think that over the course of COVID, I don't know if it happened to you, but you know, because we couldn't do anything, you got into studying something.
Hmm.
And, everybody, you know, probably took up a study into other things, and I got into the sort of like thing that you're diving into, the historical remnants of history left, and then sort of like the mysteries of what I really got into was the idea of this megalithic structures that prove that there was a higher intelligence thousands of years ago that could cut stone and place them like a you know place these like 1,000-ton stones
Mhm.
in Lebanon, say in Baalbek in Lebanon,
Yeah.
or in Cusco in Peru. Or but then if you look around, you'll find that these megalithic structure, the way that things were, are even in Japan, or they're even like in places that I wouldn't doubt that they're probably in Spain as well.
Oh yeah, no, they are. No,
Yeah,
and actually it's funny because I was doing some reading the other day. You know, the stone circles of like Stonehenge and others. Well, not
right.
actually not Stonehenge. It's a henge, but the stone circles of which we know they're all over Europe. Well, it turns out actually that the country with the biggest, if you will, population of stone circles is Korea.
Oh, bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, I was just looking into this thing yesterday. I believe that it was this guy, these caves that were recently, not recently, maybe discovered in the last 100 years in China, where they were filled with water, but when they drain them, they're you know they're giant ornate 30,000 square foot caverns that have been carved out of stone underground.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think like um, you know, it obviously shows again signs of higher intelligence from thousands of years ago, like accomplishing things that we today would find difficult to do, and that has become like I think like you know it's been at the peak of my interest of things lately, and so
Mhm.
if I came over there to visit you, I'd probably be like, well, what are we going to see today? What are we going to discover? Is there any place that is just piqued your interest that now that you're there, it has you have to go back and back.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think as we all do, you start putting together bucket lists, if you will, of like, okay, what's on the list of things to do? You know, it's like, okay, pick your theme. Okay, am I going to get into Neolithic and stuff? Okay, well then this is that list. What about this list over here? I mean, I think um, one. I mean, I'm just so excited about so many different things that I like to, you know, get involved in that it's hard to sort of focus on them all. As I was saying to you the other day, I most recently was up in Antequera, which is north of here a ways, and it's got an early dolmen site there, which is quite fascinating. It goes back, I think, about 3,700 years or something like that. No, no,
Incredible.
3,700 BC. And you know, it goes to what you're saying because you walk in in these structures and you go, how do you build something like this without you know the machinery that we think of today?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and it's a bit it sort of it gives you pause because you just sort of have to you think about the context a little bit and go, wow, that's this is 4,000 years ago,
Yeah.
and yet here we are still doing things and things
I
and
think I think many things are older than that. Like
yeah, oh,
I've
yeah, yeah.
really gotten the idea that we hate to say that something is older than a certain time period. We hate to say that the pyramids are 25,000 years old. We hate
Mhm.
to say these things. We hate to say that the Sphinx outdates the pyramids by thousands and thousands of years and all these things. But
Mhm.
it's fascinating to kind of like see that in our history, I believe, anyways, that there is sort of like a retention of us really knowing or knowing the truth because so many things along the way, by way of religious factors or whatever like that, have been destroyed
Mhm.
uh, to purify the vision of Christianity, say, for instance, or
Mhm.
taking away historical factors of which would say like that like when I was really delving into Joseph Campbell and his writings about talking about how many times the same story has been told throughout history,
Mhm.
um, throughout various cultures as well, about the shining star, the baby born, and it's just it's kind of there's an amazing sort of, I don't know, don't you have that feeling that there's so much more to know? And I know we discussed this earlier. You're right at the right there at Northern Africa as well. I mean, I've said,
Mhm.
do you have the desire to pop on over the bridge and begin the trek into Morocco or Northern Africa?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, as I mentioned, I mean, I've been to Morocco once already, and it's once again for me, and I think probably for you as well, because we're the same age and background. Morocco always had a bit of a romantic vision
For
associated
sure.
with it,
Yeah.
because beat poets and writers and the hippie trail and all the rest of that stuff back in the 60s and 70s, and it was funny because back like 2014, I think it was 2015, 2014, when we were still in Vietnam, we were thinking about where are we going to go next. And I remember at the time I saw this documentary, and they were talking about riads, which is this kind of building structure that they have in Morocco and other
Right.
countries, which is it's kind of nondescript building on the outside, but they have a courtyard in the center, and they're quite fascinating. And I was looking at these things, and they were apparently falling into like large numbers of them were falling into disrepair and could be bought quite inexpensively. And I was going, wow, wouldn't it be cool to go like buy one of these things, renovate it, do an Airbnb and set up a recording studio in it and things. And so you sort of set it up as a destination for musicians and and stuff like that. But as it turned out, because we did go, and that was sort of in the back of our mind when we were there. But when we were there, and talking to people, other expats who'd been there for a while, it wasn't as great an idea as we thought. And also, this was in that time period when you were having all these sort of social uprisings in North Africa and the Middle East and things like that. So there was a lot of tension in the air as
Yeah.
well. And nothing tangible like violent, but you could tell that there was tension, and there's just no way of knowing where that was going to headed. And anyway, it was one of those ideas. We looked at it and decided that wasn't going to be what the plan was, but it was a fascinating trip. For like I said, for the sort of romantic reasons, but that we have of Morocco as well. Paul Bowles' house, for instance, is actually a kind of museum now,
Wow.
and you just sort of walk through this place and just once again try to put yourself into the headspace of being 1960s, late
Yeah.
50s, being in this, and what Tangier was in that time period.
Has it taken longer, or because you're used to moving to like such an unusual transition, has it been easier to sort of get into Spain and as far as like your integration than it was to Vietnam?
I think inherently Europe is easier for a North American.
Yeah.
It's just, there's a cultural um, similarity and background commonality. Jumping into Asia, Um, there's just a bigger gap, and depending on the country and the when, it's different. I mean, think of your own experiences in
Yeah.
Japan.
Plus, when you went to Vietnam, it's a completely different scenario than today.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in some ways, it must have felt quite crazily adventurous to take that on. I know that Myra was telling me a little bit about your lifestyle over there, and it just sounded quite amazing and idyllic, and it just sounded like not like the typical. And so, is there anything that you miss about Vietnam? Is it ever like, ah, damn, I wish I never left?
Oh, no, lots of things. I mean, there's a part of us that still, would go back there tomorrow, and who knows, we may.
Yeah,
But it's yeah, and you're right, because in the case of Vietnam, um, remember, it was pretty much a closed country up until about 1996.
yeah,
That's when it started to open up a little bit. So when we moved there in 2000, it had only recently started to open up to international
yeah,
business and all the rest of it. So you had aid investments, international investments coming in, and companies, testing the market. But the government was still very, very in control of it. So there weren't a lot of expats there living either as well. So it and also this is pre-Facebook, pre-LinkedIn, and all those
right,
kinds of
sure,
things. So you really were um, divorced, if you will, somewhat from people and situations you'd known. That obviously changed quite rapidly as the Facebooks
yeah,
and all that stuff
very
evolved.
quick,
But for the first few years, it really was you could appear someplace and suddenly you had no past. You could reinvent yourself, which is, I think,
yeah.
impossible to do pretty much these
It's
days.
impossible now, pretty much, with the way things are. Yeah, that it's a dream of many people. I even, I talk to people all the time. Oh, I want to move to a foreign country, and many people talk about it, but very few do it. And so Don's a guy that's a doer. But Gary and I believe also Joe and I recently were talking about how I was like always saying to Gary, man, if it wasn't for meeting you and everything about the meeting of you and Images in Vogue, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And then Gary said, well, in fact, Kevin, if I hadn't have met Dawn, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And so I believe Joe said the same thing. So in fact, Dawn, I think you were responsible for all of this.
I don't know whether I should be worried about lawsuits or not.
No, it's a good thing because also I believe that the actual songwriting methodology about what Joe told me that you came up with and that we all recognize after as sort of like the ideology of the Pro One being triggered by the drum machine with the trigger notes sequencing the gate clock in
Mhm.
is a method that at the time was the equivalent of someone showing you a DAW and understanding how you could possibly create a rhythm with a melodic structure that wasn't too scientific. It was scientific, and apparently not everyone was onto it, but that method was just so crucial to what became the framework for Images in Vogue, for Skinny Puppy, for Frontline Assembly, and for NUMB, I gather as well.
Hmm.
What's
Yeah.
your, what's your takeaway on that?
Well, I mean, I remember it slightly different, and I seem to remember other people's contributions because I still remember um, Joe playing with it and suddenly realizing by double clicking the switch you could put a rest into it, so it wasn't just a straight, 16th note or whatever sequence and things like that. So
What? I don't know about that. Is this something that I don't know about?
no, no, no. I'm pretty sure that I mean, I don't have a Pro One,
Oh my God.
but yeah, I thought that there was something about, because remember there was that switch you click it
Yeah,
up and then you would start recording the
yeah,
sequence,
yeah,
and then I seem to vaguely remember something about if you then clicked it again or double clicked it, it allowed you to put a rest. So instead of going din 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 din, you could din 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 din, kind of thing to get a break in the rhythm. I think.
yeah. No, that's great. But also the way that if there's 16 steps across the 808, the typical drum machine or a 909. Out of those 16 lights, if you had, say, 3, 5, 8, and 11 lit up, the notes would only sound
Yeah.
when they hit those triggers, so that you could program in those 5 notes or 4 notes into the Pro One without even using a rest, because you would design the rests on this within the 16 steps. And then Joe, I don't know if it was you or Joe that realized that to have the sequence play as you want it, you put in the last note first. So, okay, last note first, and then the 3 or 4 other notes, and then clunk, and it's ready to trigger. And those sequences were essential, because every time you'd use it, if anybody else used it, they'd be like, well, wait, it's not running the sequence I just put in. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
So that was another secret. And I found this to be almost as important as the day that you, again, Mr. Gordon, showed me and loaned me the legendary Lexicon PCM 41, which to me was the equivalent of showing somebody, not a DAW, in this case, like a spaceship. Because this thing, I mean, it was so amazing that, were you the first guy in the band in Images in Vogue to pick one up?
No, we remember we sort of went on those shopping trips and we were buying stuff together, so because we've been using the Roland Space Echoes, and then somebody's like, no, let's get digital. So we went and traded in on the Space Echoes and bought the PCM 41s.
How many did you get?
No, I only had one, and I think Joe had two, didn't he?
Joe had 2 underneath his underneath his keyboard rig.
Yeah,
And
because he was doing this amazing thing with dotted notes because of his timing. Think of the intro to Breaking Up and things like that. He would get these rhythms going.
Yep. So one day I came over to your apartment and I said, I remember I was sitting there and you guys were cooking dinner or something like that. And I was like just so intrigued. I didn't even know that what the functions of these knobs really were, but I couldn't stop. And so you gave it to me you loaned it to me to take home. And I think that was the start of literally everything for what I remember, like everything that I remember about the creation of music, as far as for me anyways, started from that event, which is quite a crucial moment if you think about how influential someone would be to show you the ins and outs of this and then expose you to this. And up to this point, I guess as well, Gary had picked up the TR-808 and brought it in. So between this, and this, and this, and this.
Porta Studio, yes.
Okay, this became a very important component, because this is how I was like, okay, how are you going to capture all that? And I think this was was this the master idea making machine for Images at first, or was there a different one?
No, I think it would have been that. Yeah, because we didn't have sequencers per se. I mean, the closest thing we had to it was the Pro One, so everything was played real time. So to capture it, had to go to tape. And am I looking at Mushroom there? I am.
This is Mushroom. So basically,
Yes.
what we would learn, the next step after learning this, all because you and Joe had this combined knowledge, and you were sharing it with everybody, and everyone is just growing exponentially. And with the knowledge that then we entered this room, and I'll never forget that we had already been in one studio by the time we entered here. So it seemed like, okay, this is the granddaddy studio, even though it wasn't really the granddaddy studio. It seemed like it to us. So much, again, learned in this room that you didn't realize it at the time, that what you were doing was you didn't realize how crucial it was learning all these things and how you got there.
Oh, yeah, no, because I still remember at the time, the first time we were going in there, because I remember it was Lindsay Kidd that was the engineer.
Yes.
And
that meeting.
yeah, and we knew so little really about recording. We were, asking questions like, well, how do you get the delay so that the sound is over there, but the delay is on the other side? I mean, stuff that people would just sort of laugh at today as a question. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? But you just did not have access to recording studios. And so there was all these things about them you didn't understand,
Yep.
patch bays and all the rest of that stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, and and the learning that you're right that went on in Mushroom during the Images of Vogue days and successive projects, your own, my own,
Well,
and other people. It's crazy, you know.
I don't think anything would have happened if we hadn't to learn through Images in Vogue what that path was. There was no way that anyone could have known that path, I don't think, from your discoveries and Joe's discoveries and together that whole experience. I mean, I was just in a basement band basically.
Yeah, no, but we sort of all were. I mean, I always of the sort of view that doesn't matter whether it's a small, small business starting up, but and bands that when it's working, it's more than the sum of the parts, because you just get this synergistic energy and interaction going on that feeds on itself. I mean, I think back on some of the Images stuff, and I still remember that night when you were laying down the drum machine part for Germans, and
Oh
you're just,
yeah.
you were just pushing buttons on and off every time this thing was going through the 16th note sequence and changing them every time and basically improving I won't call it a drum solo, but a completely changing drum part. And same thing is like, is that how you use a drum machine? I don't think I've ever seen anybody use a drum machine like that before.
Thanks, man. I mean, I when I think back on it now and think about how it was like live composition versus writing patterns and changing,
Yeah,
uh, then essentially you digest that later and you think like, wait, yeah, I was in compose mode, I wasn't in record play mode, and
yeah.
then you could tap in things or do things, and then they even had Martindale there twisting stuff. But as I said, that wouldn't happen unless you guys, no, really, it wouldn't.
And
You think about what a chance this is, Don.
hmm,
I got back from Japan on a youth exchange program, and I went to a record store, and I was specifically looking for this album. And
yeah,
I went into the record store. It was in North Vancouver, and who should happen to be working there but Gary Smith?
yeah.
So I go and find this album, and then it turns out that Gary's like, "Oh, you like these guys?" And I was like, "Man, I had just heard these guys in Japan from some people, and I wanted to have this album instantly." And then I realized that it was became one of my pretty hugely inspirational album. And it's funny, if I put on this album to this day, I've had some friends say to me, whenever the first time I met Chris Corner from IMX, he came over to my house and I put on an album, and he said, "I was so worried about what the first album you'd put on." I said, "I'll judge you possibly too harshly as a friend if you put on Red Hot Chili Peppers." But he said, "When you put on Japan Quiet Life," he said, "I knew we were going to be very good friends." And I was like, yeah, there's a certain bonding from this album. And then I remember that we united on the idea that this was, kind of like where we were bonding, this and Yellow Magic Orchestra, which I
Yeah.
couldn't believe that you guys had heard, because it was a relatively obscure band. But so sharing these type of inspirations together with a group of guys and being able to learn together at the same time was, like, I mean, an immensely pleasurable time, Don. I have to thank you for all the times that we shared. Uh,
Like I say, I just see it. It was just the right group of people at the right time, and it just fed itself. I mean, it was an amazing progression to watch how quickly that happened.
Absolutely. And, a fine bunch of fellows too. Like, nobody had any issues. Nobody was like smoking crack cocaine or anything, or at least yet. And, and,
You
and,
saved that.
yeah, it seems like, as well, everybody like had a lot of fun, except for the fact a big takeaway for you and I is because in those days we didn't protect our hearing as much as we could, and you and I end up walking away with tinnitus.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's different world today, and ironically today, though, instead of loud concerts and being in bands being a problem, it's everyone wearing headphones and earbuds all the time that's leading to a major hearing problem. I saw
Yeah,
some stats the other day of of looking at hearing loss in people below the age of 30, and it's surprisingly high. And they attribute it to like earbuds and excessive headphone use.
I don't know, but for me, it was like definitely my monitors back in Images in Vogue. I had like a tweeter, kind of like direction right at my head,
Yeah,
right there, and it definitely started on the left side at first,
yeah.
and then I noticed that when I got into Skinny Puppy, I was overly compensating on the volume of my monitors over and over and over, and then so over time I became known as Kevin the monster with the 120 decibel monitor level because I invested in my own monitor system, and people were just running away with their ears, and I was like, well, what's wrong? You know, it's like, I had it designed that, you know, I could sidestep any real knives and stuff like that. But I just found that you know, not only it was the band a place that we learned how to record, how to write, what instruments were, but yeah, we learned how to do gigs.
Hmm.
Look at that, Don.
I know. What
That
was
was
it?
the first drum kit that you guys had in the rehearsal space when I went to audition for you guys after I met Gary that day in the record store. He said, why don't you come down? And I went down and you guys had this drum kit. And you not only that, you guys had the Pollard four syndrome concussion. I don't know whose it was, whatever. It was just sitting there. And so I immediately integrated, it was almost the exact Yukihiro Takahashi kit. And then I can see the TR-808 back there, which was acquired obviously before our first gig. A pretty, I mean, when you look back at these photos now, it looks like this is in the 60s or something. But I guess it is. We're talking. This is 40 years ago.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
around 1980, 81 to 83, I believe. So, playing things at the Love Affair. I think when we got announced, they had mentioned, of course, that you guys were from a band called Pinups. So the question is, if I said to Gary, well, if I had never met you, Gary, this band would never happen. He said, well, if I had never met Don, how is it that you met Gary?
Oh, I mean, it was one of those fluke things. I put an ad in, was it the Georgia Straight or one of those magazines,
Wow.
guitarists looking to meet, musicians or something. And Gary and I met through an ad, and both of us had, we're big David Bowie fans, and the sort of glam thing, wow, was of appeal as well. And that was also the time period when the whole new wave thing, oh God, terms new wave, was taking off, which in a way was a kind of a retro scene as well. So it was a kind of sort of hybridization of glam meets new wave in terms of our interests. And tied with that was the early electronic stuff, because Kraftwerk was an early favorite and things. Because I remember we went out and bought a Harp Odyssey was the first synth we bought. Gary and I bought it secondhand from, I can't remember the guy's name. It was a studio that folded eventually, but it was
The Art
secondhand.
Odyssey?
Yeah, it was one of those white Harp Odysseys.
Oh, wow.
And
Classic synth.
that was
I
our
don't remember
introduction.
that. I
That
don't
was our
remember
introduction to synthesizers, and as you know, no presets, and having to tune them, and the vibrato on them. It wasn't a vibrato wheel; it was those pad things, and it was it was fascinating trying to learn how to use all that, learn it, because we neither Gary or I were coming from a synth background, which is why in many ways when we met Joe, it was really a tipping point, because he
Yeah.
came with that background, and
Remember
and
this day, Don? This was the
sorry,
first photo session we did as the band.
but Lippingwell, I think, wasn't it?
This was out by the airport. What was that question?
Wasn't D. Lippingwell the photographer?
I believe so. Yeah, it's like a
Oh,
famous old Vancouver reporter,
yeah.
photographer, and took us out there and started putting us through the motions. I can tell that I just came from work. I can see I have my work shirt on. And in those days, of course, I worked at Safeway, so I was like, it was great to get out of the mold. There we are. There it is. the Pro One, and there was two of them because I gather we had to switch to do certain songs on one and certain songs on another.
Yeah. Well, but once again, so Gary was part of our secret weapon because with his job at Long and McQuaid, it allowed us to get discounts, and Ken, the finance manager, extended us credit that probably he wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And you know, some of our first gigs too. Oh, I remember this is from the first day too. Look at that. I think that has to be.
I've
I'm
never
gonna say
seen this before.
these are April 1981.
Oh, I don't ever remember seeing this photo.
Hey, it says this was taken by Kevin Fleming. I remember that name.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, you know, look at Glenn. This is classic. So this couldn't have been the first because Glenn wasn't involved in the very first lineup. Yeah, there's the
No.
TR 808 performance. This was at the Love Affair, of course. The classic. This is on the Vancouver show. Oh my God. We really were new wave, weren't we, Don?
That's a classic shot.
Yeah, I mean, if we could I have a little more rouge, please? If I don't know, if you listen to the first EP, I really think like there's a lot of really decent recording. The recording's really good. It is real new wave, and it's
You're talking about the Breaking Up EP, or
yeah,
you're
breaking
talking
up. That the whole I guess you call it the Educated Man EP. Yeah,
and the one after that, the 12-inch, yeah.
yeah. I remember This Is Us at the beginning, and This Is Us near the end. Well, what I mean by the end was you.
Into the transition phase.
Yeah, there was a transitional phase. And I believe this was our second gig here.
That was
Where,
at Pharaoh's.
yeah, at Pharaoh's in Gastown, Vancouver, Canada. I don't believe it still exists anymore.
It
And
was a
there you are.
discotheque.
No,
Look
and
at
that was by far my favorite guitar you had. What was that? The Gibson Thunderbird?
I think it was a Firebird.
Firebird, right. Absolutely gorgeous guitar.
And the thing though was like I hated it because it was neck heavy, so you'd let it go and it would just fall.
Oh no. Do you still have that guitar?
No, it got traded in for something along the way.
Isn't that guitar worth like its weight in gold now though?
Probably, but you
Yeah.
know that's the way of things, isn't it? And it was, I don't know, it had a really clunky neck on it, which because I don't have big fingers, so for me it wasn't the best guitar in the world, but it had a great sound because it was really thick and had a lot of bite.
And I remember that Joe was playing most of the keyboards, but you also played keyboards at that time. You had a Yamaha
On
CS, was it the CS 40 or something? CS 70?
I can't remember. It was the Yamaha, and there was something else. Did I still have the Odyssey at that point? I don't remember, but
Maybe it was
uh,
the Odyssey. Yeah, maybe you're right. It was the Odyssey.
because and because we were going through a phase there where we continually trading gear in and
Yeah.
getting new stuff as we because and when you think about it, that was one of the first sort of golden ages of synthesizers because you suddenly had all these things appearing on the market like the Prophet 5, the Jupiter 8, and some of the other machines that just hadn't existed before. And so
Yeah.
a polyphonic synthesizer with memory presets. What an incredible revolutionary idea when you were used to mini moves and
Oh, for sure.
Odysseys, where you had to
Presets.
set up the patch with it between
And
every
you could
song.
save a patch. I think when I watch back the Vancouver show footage of the song Breaking Up, I see that you're the one that's doing that crazy modulated sound on your Prophet 5, which was kind of cool. It was kind of cool to see that being played live and it be like as cool as that sound was.
Yeah, and it's in general when I think, oh dear God, the Yamaha, that went missing somewhere along the way. But that was an interesting guitar because it was one of those first guitars where you could switch between single coil and humbucker.
Look at that, the OBXA and the Rhodes. I don't remember him having a Rhodes. I do
Oh,
remember
that
Glenn having that haircut though.
was the Rhodes, but that was the synthesizer though, not the piano.
God, I swear that stand that Glenn is using right there, I swear I have it in the next room. Sorry, Gary, I think I have it. And there's the classic old Simmons kit that, with Images in Vogue, it was kind of challenging because sometimes we were asked to play larger gigs where, for instance, we had to open for Roxy Music or bands in larger venues, and they weren't accommodating like the monitors for such drum kits in those days. So it
Yeah.
was like the equivalent of playing a tabletop in front of 15,000 people. But like the classic Love Affair, I think the Love Affair was a place that also helped sort of in look at that black lipstick. Oh my God. This was, I think, our third gig, Don.
Mm.
And where we're playing the classic Love Affair and sort of like, oh, there's the classic Don, you got the classic Japan look going there, I have to say.
Yeah, that's the look.
You know what I mean? Look at that. How can you be any better? Oh, look at Gary. Oh my God. The black lipstick that night was just flowing. And yeah, this was with our first vocalist. I guess we still hadn't transitioned to Dale Martindale yet.
Oh, yeah, that was the
Gary Johnson.
yeah.
Unfortunate for him, he got into fisticuffs after one of our shows, and that was it for him. Yes. But yeah, I think this was our first gig here with Mauve. And it's funny that, yeah, you ended up marrying Madeline from Mauve.
Yeah.
Make sure to say hi to Madeline for us. If she ever wants to pop in and say anything, feel free. Dawn, I do believe that is autographed by you. Is that true there? I see it. Looks like your official signature.
It looks like everybody's on there.
Look, that's a rare photograph right there. Now, the one thing that I have to say that I really love about Images in Vogue, and I'm going to touch wood right now, is that we're all still alive. We theoretically could redo this. Will we ever?
Interesting question.
I mean, a lot of people ask me all the time
Yeah.
if this will ever happen again, and I'm like, well, I love the guys, and I'm sure that they would possibly love to, share the idea, but essentially, I don't know about the possibility of the gear or the other technical parts being possible that what we were up to in those days.
It's probably easier today, actually,
Oh,
if you think about it, because back then, I mean, everything's become integrated, so you could literally go up there with a single keyboard that's got all your effects and all the rest of it in.
yeah, and then you have all those things, and it's a little easier. And the only thing that you really don't have is like a place like the Love Affair, like a scene that would really
Yeah.
embrace the whole community again. I think, does it make you wonder like why good things like this have to end?
No, I think they have to. I mean, we're getting sort of waxing into philosophy in a way, but if if there isn't an end, that you don't have the impetus and a need to push to get something done.
I don't know. It's kind of sad because it's like, all the good things that we love always seem to go. And you ask yourself, well, why wouldn't we preserve such a thing that has such a strong vibrance to like this depth in the soul of the community? So I think I noticed that now, but at the time, you don't realize how important like the sort of gathering point is for everything, the scene and everything like that. I guess, I don't know, maybe it's because we're just young.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And whilst I'm certainly not putting the Vancouver scene on at this level, but if you look at the arts and history, there's always these, shall we say, these coordinates in space and time where there something happens, like the left bank in Paris in the 20s when you had these magical things happen. New York in the 60s with the factory and the folk scene and all that stuff that was going on. And these things happen in greater and smaller ways. And there was a brief period there in the early 80s where, to my recollection, in the Vancouver scene, you had this collision between the art the art scene, um, music, fashion, and all these things came together, and they informed each other. And from this just came this kind of vibrancy and a desire to create something really new and different. And and I think that dynamic is always fragile. It kind of has to be because it is so dynamic and there's so many factors going on and experiments taking place, some of which are what they are become wonderful and some of which become absolutely destructive. But it's that energy. But it's kind of like physics, the law of entropy. And energy wants to dissipate,
Yeah.
uh, and then so um, I think when you're living in the middle of it, you don't recognize it because it's your day to day. And it's only after it starts to shift that you realized how special that group of people or
Yeah.
that event or
Or
whatever was.
eras.
I mean,
Eras.
I've been reading some books lately. I mean, in my history thing again, I've been picking up books on, stuff I didn't know much about, like London in the 60s. And a guy named Joe Boyd, who was an early promoter back in the early 60s of like some of the blues guys and then started Hannibal Records and various other things. And as I read these books, one of the things really comes out of it again is this whole thing of just this convergence that just for whatever reason seems to really work and only for a period of time. Because so when we think about music of the 60s or a swinging London, let's say, it really was international in terms of its impact. But when you really get into it, you start to realize that actually it was a relatively small number of people who were all
Right.
knowing each other and working together and or competing with each other and things. And same thing when you start looking at other areas. And it's just it's like that butterfly thing, the metaphor of, flaps its wings in Australia and something happens. It's like, sometimes these things have a much more pronounced effect than you would ever imagine just because
Or
of happenstance.
I found it interesting recently when we went to the Cruel World Festival and realized that 90% of the bands that were playing were over the age of 60, and started thinking about, the interest in purity and some of the scenes and how it brings back everything. But it also made me realize that at the time, while a scene is in its pure form, that you actually become what you are. Not you're not emulating something. I think like when when we were at the beginning and when we were creating Skinny Puppy, or when you were creating Numb, or when Bill was creating Frontline Assembly, we had a pure vision about almost about where Vancouver was headed musically. And it's almost like, yeah, we became the next layer, became it and created it. And it wasn't something that I felt that anyone was following as much as we were just living that time. So it seems like, it's at certain times like a page change as far as like evolution of music, like punk coming out of rock essentially, and making you feel like, oh my God, I needed this, or new wave coming. It really blew my mind when I was talking with John Fox in one of the chats here, and he was talking about witnessing the evolution of the sort of like the birth of punk at one Patti Smith show where everybody was there. And he said he could see John Lydon over there, and it was like almost about to explode into Johnny Rotten the next day, or Sid Vicious was over there, and all these people and the guys from the Clash were over here, and so like could witness it happening. And then afterwards, I was reading how he was at the function. There was an event in London that it was like I can't remember the exact name of it right now, but it was where it was like sort of like the evolution of Pink Floyd and the whole sort of psychedelic scene. And John was witness to this as well. I think it was called the Kings, something like it was a very famous show that had a lot of the old school, bands that really shook loose the whole sort of evolution between, British pop music and then the whole psych evolution into psych. It's really interesting to see, I guess, as we're talking about here, change and how things are pure. And I was thinking about today, I was like looking for the same thing. And it seems like today I feel like there's just a lot of, you have to sort of like sift through what is pure and what is a new evolution and what isn't, and what's really just an inspiration from somewhere. And it seems more and more as we progress, the evolution of music is ever less people sort of like defining a new path and more so following. And what do you think about that?
In 500 words or less, compare and contrast. It's like that's I I'm always careful because we can always point fingers to our own parents and go they don't understand it or they hate you and things like that. And I think when I look at when sort of my take on some of the musical things that happened, I partially link it to technological revolutions. Um, when we think of the 60s and the sort of some of the real high points, you start thinking Jimi Hendrix and things like that. And and the guitar changed from being just or the electric guitar changed from being just a louder version of an acoustic guitar into a radically different instrument
Right.
because of the way the distortion and other things were brought into it, and a new musical vocabulary evolved. Also, bringing in blues and other elements, and that really built on itself in a lot of different ways. And we saw that build into prog rock and other things as the classical music thing got brought in. And we saw jazz rock fusions and all of these different kinds of things until we had the implosion and around sort of 77 with sort of punk and new wave. And then for me, the next big sort of technological revolution was one that we partook of, which was in the early 80s, which was the by the way, I've ignored some stuff here too, because obviously there's the whole Berlin scene in the 70s and stuff in Europe. But with the advent of the relatively inexpensive polyphonic synthesizer and drum machines, you suddenly allowed for the invention of a new musical vocabulary that hadn't happened before. And it really was about invention of something new because
Hmm.
there were so many possibilities that had never been explored because suddenly this one box could sound, like a sweet string patch, or it could sound like, Hell's Gates opening, depending on the vocabulary you chose to invent with it. And there was a whole succession of new sort of tools that came along at that point, like the digital delays, the FM modules, so DX7s and things like that, and other kinds of technology in a really short period of time, which allowed for this explosion of new things. And sampling technology, obviously, when by the mid '80s kicking in, and then with that being picked up in hip hop and other things, and so you had the next real big revolution move from what we think of in sort of the sort of synth world that we're more a part of into the hip hop influences, but then once again all that stuff coming together, but in that fusion of elements. It's just that it's fusion and not really distinct trails going off on new pathways.
I I love that. I also feel that in the past, if we look back, we'll always find that a certain piece of equipment or an effect even was even better than we thought it was. So in some ways, they made things that even were more radical in some cases back then than they will now, even though that isn't the case with where it's now become with super synths and all the rest of the whole world. I mean, but as far as like less is more theory, how people could envision this new world unfolding by this glimpse of having the ability to use this equipment. help them to stretch the door open so that now we've got this huge variety of technology, like kind of like hammering at us, like almost like overload. And it's like saying, well, can you sift through this challenge and find your way to find your unique world without just ending up with Ableton presets and so on? So it's really interesting because in some ways you would think it would make it easier, but it hasn't really so much as defined what you would think as a glimpse of a new culture as it did before. That's what I'm waiting for. I want to hear something where I think like, wait, I'm witnessing now a page change from technology that is just completely blatant, as blatant as when punk rock came along and said something to us. I would just love for that to be possible. What do you think about that? You think that's possible still? Or how long will it take before it is?
Um, that gets into a bigger question of revolution and what revolution is. Um, to revolt against something, there has to be something definite that you're not agreeing with. You know, I don't like that rock and roll. I'm gonna go
Right.
do this. You know, whatever.
Yep.
The the I think the difficulty today is that the the mainstream, for lack of a better word, or whatever you call it, the society, whether we're talking musical aspects of it or filmmaking or whatever, is so diffuse, and there's no one center to it. It's really hard to push against or be revolting against something when it just is all about absorbing whatever you do. The minute you do something that is revolutionary, it immediately gets adopted into the mainstream. So it never does truly get a chance to truly be, you know, revolutionary and out there and waving its banner for a period of time to define a distinct identity. I mean, you know, it just increasingly there's more and more adjectives thrown around to describe subgenres of subgenres of subgenres.
Right.
And in a Spotify universe with how many, you know, millions of songs, when there's only 12 notes in an octave, um, you
You've
know, I think
made
really these days we're painting with timbre. We're not painting with music like in terms of notes anymore. And I think we are still thinking about music, if you will, in a kind of 20th century or a traditional sense of like melody and notes, as opposed to just thinking of it more as constructors of timbres that may or may not be rhythmic, that may be washes. And, you know, some people could say, but then that's just wallpaper, isn't it? Um, I don't know. Maybe music, you know, it, is no longer one thing. Maybe music has morphed into a multi-dimensional thing. You have pop music, which has a particular role. You have other kinds of music that are purely about, like I say, sort of experimental, wallpaperish. And that sounds pejorative, but it's not meant to be. But and and it really, I mean, I suppose the ultimate you could say is, are we headed towards something where through AI, your you have your AI box that knows exactly what your desires are and generates music in real time that it changes to your every mood.
apparently we are right on the cusp of that scenario where you would be able to compose AI music that might say, "Hey, make me a song that sounds like NUMB."
Hmm.
And you know, that will be a nightmare era, I think, because then we'll all just despise listening to something because it will just have all these cliche things. I think like part of the attraction of certain eras of like what I think possibly industrial or our scene was is that we thought we were maybe using gear improperly and achieved results that maybe were stumbled upon and happy accidents, you might want to call them.
Mhm.
And that was always inspiring along the way. Now you're at the point where in 2 years you will have been making NUMB albums for 40 years. You've made a variety with people throughout time, partners, and starting with the cassette and Christmeister and Death on the Installment Plan, Wasted Sky, Koro, uh, Blood Meridian, Language of Silence, and Mortal Geometry. And then I was really blown away that on this last album that we went through and talked about in your last chat, that the majority of this was created by you, including vocals.
Yeah.
And I think that people like, I mean, I was gonna. I remember when I said to you last year, I was like, "Who's the vocalist?" And you're like, "Me," and I was like, and you said, "Well, you kind of went into, well, no one can probably do something better than how you foresee something than probably yourself, and just adapt yourself and like the way that you move and like the way that you morph into a new person. You took that persona on and basically made that work. What are you working on now?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned vocals actually too, because the new project that just finished. Let's see if I can get this to come up. One sec. Share.
Got a project.
Did that come up? Yeah.
Yes.
New project. Data
Data
Void.
Void, Strategies of Dissent. Excellent. So tell us about it.
Um, like I say, the segue. So interesting that you mentioned vocals, because the thing about this album that I think is somewhat unique within the sort of heavy electronic genre is we've actually got two vocalists on the album. James, who I'm working with on the album, and myself are both trading off lead vocal duties depending on whose voice is best for the part, in a way. And it moved into other territories too, where things that in the past we might have used software for, where we actually went and actually sang proper harmonies for, yeah, well, proper harmonies. We made use of harmony as a vocal factor, because in the past vocals, somebody's like, oh right, I've got this great song, oh, I need to put a vocal on it. Okay, well, let's just slam something off and put some distortion on it. And this time around, we were much more conscious of the fact that no, a vocal is going to be an important part of this. Yes, it's still going to have drive and aggression. It's still going to have all the electronics and things like that, but the vocals are actually not going to be an afterthought. They're going to be an important part of the actual track. And and I think, and it took a while to sort of pull it together, but I think in the end, when I've sort of been listening back to this, because we've just been compiling all the tracks for mastering and things, and tweaked a few things, I'm sort of going through and I'm going, wow, this is one of those albums that I'm at the end of it and I'm ready to send it off, and I'm not bored with it, because normally, how it is, by the time you finished mixing and recording, do all that, if you're kind of bored with the record, then you sort of want to get on to something else or go tour it and things. And this is one where I'm sort of listening to it and going, wow, I really like this. I want to actually hear this song through to the end. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how people respond to it, because I think I'm not gonna say I think it'll stand up as being somewhat unique in the marketplace.
When will it be out? What's the details?
In the next few months, we're just sorting through the details. Are we going to DIY distribution in Europe, or what are we going to do in North America? So I'm looking at the possibility of doing a split North America versus Europe situation. So that's the only thing. We're just waiting through. The artwork's done. The mastering will be finished very quickly, and
Nice.
so it's just a case of getting it out there.
That's awesome. It's exciting. And so you typically have worked with Metropolis. Sad to see that Dave left. Are you still thinking possibly that could be the home for America?
Uh, it could very well be. I mean,
Yeah.
I really like the people who work there, and have always had a good relationship with them. But as you're aware, just the way things have moved recently with mailing costs and duties and all this sort of stuff going on internationally, it's become really difficult for companies to ship anything across the Atlantic in a way that
Absolutely.
makes any sense. So I really think we're moving back to a split situation in terms of how we
Gonna have
license.
to. I mean, especially with you living in Europe, you're gonna have to, yeah, figure that out in that sense. Because I think it's like 22 to 20 something $4 to ship a CD to Europe right now from here.
Yeah, it's insane. I
It's
mean,
crazy.
yeah, you know, label vinyl on demand,
Right, yeah.
and he
Great
posted
label.
some. Yeah, yeah, he,
Also, Artifact. I mean, you should possibly talk to Artifact as well too, because I believe they have some distribution things set up with Europe and stuff, and also another great label.
the
Um,
guys out of Toronto, right?
I believe based in Toronto, but Jacek runs it from Iceland, if you can believe it.
Oh, really? That would explain. Okay, that explains. Because I remember looking through their roster one night, and they had this Icelandic band on there. And I'm going,
Yeah,
wonder why he ended up signing them. That would do it.
yeah. I really love working with Artifact, so I thumbs up there. Up until now, people have been able to find your stuff on your Bandcamp, um, and it'll probably be available on Bandcamp as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean Bandcamp is a resource for everybody. They can't really,
yeah.
not utilize that. It's the way that it's probably the way that most people get their music these days. You would think, at least for me.
Yeah. No, it's
Let's
same. Because you don't have access to stores. Stores just don't. If you can find a store that actually carries product, and mail order just isn't practical these days. So
Yeah, I remember record stores. My God. Remember actually going into record stores and actually being excited for the search. And you'd be like, wow, what am I going to find? You'd be like, people would come out of there and they'd be like holding something up in the air and you'd be like, wow, you found that. I miss those days.
yeah,
Let's take some questions for you. Num is awesome, says so Adam F. McDonald. Thanks, Adam. Just love to know what he's doing right now creatively and if there's plans to release. Well, we just went over that. Is there no more Num, Dawn? Is it going to be
no, no,
just
no, no, no. The data void is the first priority, so that's going to be the first one out. And actually, his project is a jihad. He's doing some shows in Europe later in the year, and he's actually going to preview a couple of the tracks as a part of his live set later this year.
how do you spell that? Gion, did you say?
Jihad, Jihad.
Okay, Jihad. And so where's he from?
He's from Texas.
From Texas. How'd you guys meet?
Years ago, when I was on tour with NUMB back in the '90s, we met. He came to one of the shows and things, and funnily enough, I think it was 2018, got this email out of the blue, and saying, "Hey, we met, blah blah blah, blah and stuff, and I'm going to be in Southeast Asia on holiday, and can we meet up?" And I was like, "Sure." And so we ended up meeting up in Saigon and hit up friendship there, or built on it, and it just sort of evolved, as a logical thing to do.
Okay, I have to ask, when somebody comes to Saigon, what's the first thing you would take them to do?
um,
Eat, probably, right?
Probably.
What would be the food? What would be the first food that you would take them for?
Oh, well, first you have to find out whether they have all the food allergy lists you have to go
Yeah,
through.
yeah,
Okay, what do
sure.
you not eat, But
What's
once
what's
you
what's the must try? What's the thing? Okay, the first place I would take you. Is there one of those things?
the,
Nothing specific.
there's just I mean, I have a hard time because there's just so much of it.
Yeah,
I'm one
okay,
of
well
those
that's
people
good.
who I love food, so it's like, yeah, I really like this,
I
I really
mean,
like this.
for me, Dawn, when I think of Japan, when I get there, the very first thing on my mind is food.
Yeah,
I can take you to the restaurants right now. I got four that I'll take you to, lead you by the hand, and they're all just spectacular at what they do. But they're it's like how you think of a country, you immediately run to those places. The only other, you know, I would like to know that about Spain. I don't know what I would run for. Would I run for tapas?
um, no, probably not. Well, depends on where in the country you are. Down in
Yeah,
the south, seafood.
seafood.
Yeah, because Mediterranean's like,
Yeah, and what would
15
that
minutes
be?
away.
What would be your first choice? Ceviche or something like that?
Could be ceviche.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of what's it called? It's a um, I had it last night.
It's called
Complete mental.
forgetful fish.
It's called mental blank. But yeah, seafood. I mean, or actually, probably Spanish vermouth.
Don, are you speaking Spanish yet?
Not very well.
That's what I always find as being most challenging. Did you were you able to learn much Vietnamese?
Some, yeah.
That's interesting.
For the thing about Vietnamese that's unlike a lot of the other Asian languages is they use the same alphabet, or a pretty similar alphabet to what to
Oh,
West.
that's good. That's interesting.
So you can actually read it. I mean, it's got diacritics which imply that let you know what the tones are and things like that because the tones
Right.
change the meaning of the word quite significantly. Whereas if you go to Thailand, I mean, not only are you dealing with a different sounding language, you're dealing with this crazy script that is very
I,
difficult
sh-
to read.
I sure would love to know how to write Thai script though, man. That stuff's beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful looking.
Yeah, it looks like it's beautiful. That's why I see it as art. Doug Taylor, oh hell yeah, not a question, but Closer from Language of Silence is one of my all-time favorite songs that I've ever heard. I found myself liking something I just recorded and then suddenly realized I'm just trying to copy Closer again.
Oops.
Oops. Yeah. Robert Allen, yes, NUMB must be the only project that has had more full-time vocalists than Spinal Tap has had drummers. Question, the rhythms and noise layers, especially on Death, Language and Silence, Blood Meridian, and Mortal Geometry are great fun to listen to. Can you shed any light on what you used? Do you often use outboard gear to process drum machines and samplers that you've sequenced, or do you mangle everything inside the box as you program them? Long question there.
I think the short answer is depending on the project and who is involved, it changed. Death on the Installment Plan we did with Ken Marshall, where we did it in Mushroom. He had access to all these crazy outboard boxes, and so we were using those. Um, on Mortal Geometry, most of it was done in the box with some external processing, but a lot of it was done in the box. Is just the easiest way to do it. Um,
Logic?
yeah, I it's funny. I keep trying to. I keep thinking about making the leap to Ableton because no. The only reason I say that is for the fact that it's got live built into it, not live, cycling. What do you call it? Able
Yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking
Max,
about.
Max,
Max
and
MSP.
and the algorithmic aspects of Max for allowing probabilities and other stuff are really appealing to me in terms of some of the
Yeah,
things I'm
yeah, they're
working with
nice.
these days. So that's the appeal. But at the same time, there's a whole other aspects of Ableton that are not calling to me,
Yeah,
and a major time investment just getting back up to speed in terms of
that's just it. Getting back up to speed on something where you don't have to think about the actual software. You're just thinking about creation.
yeah.
Yeah, I think if you can do that with anything, then that's the machine you should choose. But God, I even tried, what's it called? Fruity Loops or whatever it was. And I thought like, oh, this will be fun. This will be easy. And it was like, hell, if I could figure out that thing. It
Yeah.
was like, it's like kids are apparently using it. And I'm like, what's up with me? Like, I'm just, I don't know. So some things are just,
No, no. You get it wired into a certain way of doing things,
yeah,
and it's all the other things like the keyboard shortcuts and sort of process. I mean, it used to be, as you say, the software becomes transparent because you're just doing what
yes.
you and you're
I
thinking
think,
musically rather than about the software.
I think Logic has been the best for that for me, for being transparent.
Yeah, but
Hey,
what's that thing I saw you just were borrowing an Atari 1040?
say that again.
You're using an Atari 1040 again?
Oh, no, no, no. So I have a second studio set up where I'm trying to set up the exact old Skinny Puppy studio as it was, back in the day. Because
Yeah.
we wrote every one of our albums pretty much from Vivisect all the way to the end, the process, all using the Atari 1040 and Steinberg Pro 24. So
Hmm.
I have all the songs still saved on discs and all the samples and stuff. So I could recall it. But the funny thing is trying to find a absolutely well working 1040 ST these days is
Yeah.
very difficult. I've had 3 people send me Atari 1040 ST. Thank you very much, people. But they don't fully work. It'll be like one can't copy disks, one can't save disks, and good luck if one can open the full program. So I'm thinking to myself, I wonder why that is. And apparently there's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong in an old Atari, but I started thinking, well, certainly there must be a new in box one that's been like sitting in some shop for like 30, 40 years. And then someone pointed it to me on eBay and it was like $1,500. So you're going to pay the price if you want one.
Has nobody made a virtual instance of an Atari 1040?
Not that I think reads the discs. I mean, if that is the case, I would love to know if there's
Mm,
somebody out there that knows about that. Steinberg Pro. Well, basically Steinberg Pro 24 is what the
yeah.
sequencer I need.
And the other thing, because I always also I've got this problem of early versions of songs that were done in Logic that I can't open anymore because they were way, way, way back.
Exactly.
And I did find a company, which ironically is in LA, who I guess have old computers kicking around. And what they'll do is they'll take your old file and convert them into a format that you can read currently. And I
Oh wow.
wonder if there might be somebody around who could do that with your 1040 Steinberg files and turn them into something you could read in Logic or something.
That would be interesting because that could work.
Yeah, I mean,
That was-
maybe just do a little looking because, like I said, I did find a company that could do that for like the really like Logic version 2 or whatever it was.
Well, you guys must have used the Atari 1040 ST and a sequencer for a while as well, right?
Yeah, when did we switch? Yeah, it wasn't until Blood Meridian that we moved away from
Was it
that side.
Notator or Creator or one of
Yeah,
those ones?
yeah, yeah. We're using yeah, no,
Yeah,
Creator.
yeah. Exit. Hi, I was going to suggest NUMB last chat. Priming the shit hammer. Questions to come later. Okay. Helian. Oh, hell yes. Very excited. NUMB is absolutely amazing. See, Don, the people on here just love you. I saw NUMB play back in '98. It was a Monday night and I worked all day. I had to get up early the next day for work with about 3 hours sleep. So exhausted the rest of the week, but it was totally worth it. Such a great show. Thanks, Don. Looking forward to this chat. Found my ticket stuff from the show. Toronto, Lee's Palace, May 25th, 1998. Okay.
That was one of the last shows we ever did.
Ryan Conley, remember seeing NUMB Open Front Line Assembly and at the 90s at Irving Plaza in New York City. We just played there the other day. What a great show that was. Any stories from that tour?
Oh, no, it was an amazing tour. I mean, like, if I was a fan, I would have been blown away. I mean, think about I mean, you had Frontline, Decrups, and Numb. I mean, quite distinctly different from one another, but all within this sort of, you know, powerful electronic phase. It would have been a killer tour to go see. Yeah. That was the
Fun.
first time we actually toured with big tour buses, so for us it was like a real novelty.
You got to pay your dues when you do those tours, right?
Mm.
Well, how were you guys traveling?
On that tour that was the tour buses, but the ones preceding that had been the
Oh,
van,
good.
the
Good,
van
good,
from
good.
hell.
Did you guys
You
share
know,
one with Frontline Assembly all together?
yeah, there was I think two buses and then a truck transporting most of the gear. So
Wow, good
we
deal.
shared one with D Krups and
Nice,
some of the road crew.
nice. Yeah, I mean, when you have a bus, it's a lot easier to do tours and wake up rested and be able to do the show normally. William R. Pugsley, hi, Don and Kevin. Don, back in the mid 90s, I bought a Roland DJ 70 from you. I came over to your place, I think on Robson Street, with my friend Andrew Amy of Factory Records. Dave Collings might have been there too. Memory is sketchy. Anyways, did you ever use that DJ 70 with its unique scratch dial on any recordings?
I'm having a mental blank here.
Don, I
Maybe
looked it up because I didn't know what it was, and it's like this like sampler made by Roland that has like a scratch disc on it.
I don't know. No, I don't remember it either, but maybe somebody had lent, or maybe I was auditioning it off somebody. I honestly don't
Yeah,
remember.
I,
Wow.
I don't remember it,
No.
that piece of gear either. When I looked it up, I said, I don't think I've ever seen one of those. Was there any traditional Vietnamese music that you enjoyed, and did it influence you or incorporate it in your music that you're making?
Um,
Any good Vietnamese bands, Don?
yeah, these days there's some incredible ones. I mean,
I'll
it's
bet.
really, I mean, it's actually there's a website or online magazine. I think it's Unite. Asia or uniteasia.org or something like saying that. But basically, it's all about punk, metal, and other bands from Asia, and you just some crazy stuff coming out of places like Thailand and Vietnam, and Taiwan's a major metal center and things. Obviously, that's not traditional music, but yeah, there is some very cool stuff coming out of that part of the world. And you can find it on Bandcamp too. So if you're interested, just go trolling around Bandcamp and you can find some of these bands, and they're really, really kick ass. Vietnam traditional music, not so much, but some of the music from Cambodia became influential. So one of the tracks on Mortal Geometry had that built in.
Oh, cool.
And so where actually I found there's a traditional kind of temple music that I found, and there was a performer who I'd found on YouTube and was going to use part of it, but I tried to contact her, and it became, and I mean, I found out how to contact her, and everything, but it just became impossible to get a reply because I was
Yeah.
going to clear a license and things like that because there's only like 7 or 8 seconds or something that I want to use. And so in the end, I ended up having to hire one of those services where they recreate samples for you. And they did an amazing job because they found this woman who
Wow.
had the same timbre of voice, was listening to something in a language that was not her language, and managed to create the cadence and the phrasing and everything so that
Wow.
once I started putting the delay and stuff on it, you couldn't tell that it wasn't the same performance.
In Japan, they have these instruments that are native to Japan for typically making koto music, and
Mhm.
some of them are really cool. Actually, very rare now, as sort of introduced by Heinbach on YouTube. And
I saw
basically,
that. I saw that video. Yes, those things
yeah,
are
isn't it
awesome.
amazing? It made me
Yes.
want to go search for one instantly. And then by him posting that, it was like I think he upped the value on those overnight. Just
Yeah.
like disappeared instantly. I never got one, but is there anything like that in Vietnam?
No, no. For me, when I think music of the region, I'm more drawn to the sort of Balinese tradition,
Yeah.
and which made its way because it made its way into Cambodian court music. I mean, it's made its way partially into Vietnamese court music as well. But Vietnam has a more complex history because it was essentially a colony of China for about 800 years. Then the French were in there and various others organizations. So it's a real it's a culture that has assimilated a lot of different influences, and as opposed to something where you think Indonesia and there's more of a sort of purity because it never really was brought, did not assimilate as many influences and things like that. And so things like gamelan and stuff like that are more what I think of in terms of music of the sort of Southeast Asian region.
So there's no Vietnamese electronic synthesizer company.
Synthesizer company?
Yeah. Electronic
Actually,
instrument of Vietnam.
no, no, actually, and this was one of the things about living there is um, while you could access Roland and Yamaha products, forget anything like, Moog
Oh,
or any
wow.
of those no, and even, going over to Singapore and places, there wasn't a lot of that stuff. It just was very difficult to find those things. Hong Kong had one shop that used to import things. Well, I shouldn't say there's probably more than one, but only a couple that I found. So no, the
Yeah.
stuff you sort of take for granted. It's like, I think I'll go pick up a Nord or whatever. It's like, no, you couldn't.
I think Hideki Matsutake from YMO had mentioned that importation of Moog and any Moog, I should say, of any of these products in those days had heavy taxation.
Yeah.
So you really had to pay a lot of money to get them and making it extra expensive. I think he paid 3 times as much for his system, whatever System 35 or whatever he got back then. So it's probably a similar thing like that. But yeah, let's see what else we got here. Droid Harmony, hello Don. Just wondering what your impressions are of how music technology has evolved, improved, shifted, or even worsened since your first years creating music? Favorite things to play then and now?
Yeah. I'm
Hard questions, I realize.
no. It's just to be
You're probably
succinct.
surprised to see all these questions.
Yeah, I mean it's the possibilities for somebody who are starting today are incredible. I think the challenge is something that you alluded to earlier is limiting your choices to something finite rather than you just taking everything on board and just running through the presets. Ultimately, I think it's about trying to find those kinds of sounds and textures that that you feel reflect the emotional qualities that you're trying to construe. I mean, and so actually, and the downside of the software-driven stuff, and we've seen this recently, like Absinthe, as you know, is being discontinued or not supported anymore. And for me, Absinthe was one of those things that I really loved. It was one of my
Yeah,
go-tos.
great synth.
And so now I'm going, okay, what am I going to replace Absinthe with? And so I have been
Well,
looking around, trying out other things to see what might sort of hit that sweet spot. It won't be Absinthe, obviously, but will allow me to have that kind of abstraction that Absinthe was great for.
it's like what you do there is you build a dual boot system where you have one on OS 10.9.5 or whatever the OS that supports that, and then you have another bootable drive for modern stuff, and so you
Yeah,
can always go back.
yeah,
I set that up on my thing, so I actually like to work in OS 10.9.5 a lot. There's a lot of things that I liked about um, that OS, but I like to bounce back and forth. So that's a way to work within that
yeah.
structure.
Yeah, no, and I've got the same thing too. I've got some external boot drives as well with software that's not
Yeah,
supported or that just doesn't make the cut. I mean, the other thing that's been happening lately too, as you know, is that some there's new software coming out which will only run on the M chips. So
right.
I'm going, oh, I'd like to try that. Whoops, can't run it because I'm still
Yeah,
using Intel.
yeah. I've got an M chip computer here now, and it's interesting to see. I mean, God, there's some great things about it, but then yeah, some things frustration, old stuff doesn't run, whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I see
No,
some stuff. I see
the
some
thing.
stuff back there. I see innovation, and what else do I see?
Oh, uh, the old Prophet 5 sitting in the corner.
Is that the original Images in Vogue Prophet 5?
Yep.
Wow, folks, that's the one as seen on the Vancouver show earlier where Don is standing in front of it. That is classic. That's a thing of history. So that's a 40-year-old synth right there.
Yep.
One owner.
Yeah, and too many tours. It needs a bit of work.
Speaking of touring, did you ever play live in Vietnam with NUMB?
No, not at all. No, I mean, the first 15 years I was there, I wasn't really doing music much. I mean, I was doing some work in the advertising. I listened to the advertising industry, doing sound design and stuff.
Yeah.
But and then was at the university was teaching sound for students, but it was primarily in the context of sound design for film rather than music and
Nice.
composition and things like that. So yeah, so no live stuff there.
Any plans for live stuff coming up for the new stuff or this year?
That's always the big question. I won't give a definitive yes or no. Possibly,
Okay, possibly.
but
He's under
it's
NDA, folks.
it's it's not the highest priority because I've got these other projects to get. Once Data Void is out, then I've got a Halogen release I want to get out because I've got most of the stuff written. I just need to consolidate it, finish the mixing, and I've got a bunch of NUMB stuff written that I need to get out. And then I'd
Wow.
like to see about getting the a sort of 30th anniversary edition of Death on the Installment Plan back out because it's been out of print for quite a number of years.
Well, you're staying busy. That's what I like to hear. Um, Keep us posted on this and we will let people know. Uh, Due to intercontinental moves, I imagine your gear studio has changed dramatically. What gear, hard or soft, do you currently favoring? I think Don's pretty much gone through a lot of that. Was there something you had to throw away when you moved?
It wasn't so much throw away. Had a lot of stuff in, well, actually, I still have some stuff in storage in Vancouver. I had stuff in storage in London for years, and it just hasn't, shall we say, survived the test of time. You
When's
know,
the last time you've been to Vancouver?
ages ago. I don't remember.
Yeah,
Um,
you can't remember it. Isn't that weird? God.
uh,
For me too, though, Don.
yeah,
I've only been
'cause I
there
used to
one
go to,
time properly in 25 years. We played
yeah,
there, but I mean, I only went there one time.
yeah. No, I remember I saw you when I remember you were doing a DJ show with Stephen.
Oh, right, we did that. Yeah, we flew up
Yeah,
for that.
and I was down with Myra. I was in town for the weekend or something. I remember we came down to see you.
Oh, was that the last time we saw each other?
I think so.
2008, I believe that was, which now it's already like goddamn 15 years ago. I just don't like how fast time is going. Everything is just like blazing by. Nick Nimick, I
Oh,
love.
so the question is, so what has survived? Yeah, what has survived? The Nord lead has survived, and the K2000 has survived.
Oh, nice. You know, Dwayne once called the K2000 one of the greatest synths ever invented. Which is your favorite synth ever invented?
That's a real hard question, but I
Probably
would
that
agree
Prophet
with him
5.
about I would agree with him about the K2000 being great because it could make some incredibly odd sounds, which you could then sample and use to create rhythms
Yeah,
and all sorts of things. So I mean, I think it's a really nice sound creation tool, and actually, I really like the feel of the keyboard on it.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Um, some people say Ray Kurzweil is like next level alien, and I kind of believe it. He kind of nonchalantly invents a great synth and then just steps aside to do other things. But
Hmm.
the K2700 is kind of interesting, and it's kind of interesting to see that the architecture hasn't changed at all. Really, it's just got
Mhm.
what looks to be new metal or something like that. But no one has actually come forward to me and said I have one. And by the way, this is new about it, or this is new. So hopefully somebody will.
Mhm.
And it's important to say that you've held on to the Prophet 5 for that long. So some
And
some pieces of gear you cannot let go of.
I found a guy up in Madrid actually who does vintage synth repairs. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, because I had my Waldorf microwave done, and he did a great job on it.
We should get you hooked up with Daniel Meyer. He goes down to Spain now all the time, hanging out there with his lovely. He's. I'm not too sure where exactly it is, but I have a funny feeling that you guys and How Job, Daniel Meyer might make a good bill doing some stuff over there. You friends with Daniel?
I see his stuff on Facebook, but we're not direct friends. We met once, I believe, years ago because we did a show together in, I think, was it Strasbourg?
Yeah.
The Sonair Festival or something, way back in
Such a
97 or something.
He's just such a great guy. I think it might be interesting. He's always seemingly putting on cool events too. So
Yeah,
maybe I'll
yeah,
pass on a intro. Um, let's see what Nick has to say. I love NUMB and overall Don's contributions to industrial music. NUMB to me is basically a perfect representation of what industrial is. I was very appreciative of Don answering my email in the 2000s about what gear was used in NUMB thus far. It was mind-blowing to me that you would answer a random kid's email with such detail. So thank you, Don. I'm curious if you find it challenging in any way to mix hardware synths with software synths. I find that you need to turn the volume down much lower in EQ for hardware synths, whereas software synths seem much easier to mix. What do you find? Blah, blah, blah.
Um, I think the short answer is no, but I have this lately. I've been noticing. I think, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that the bottom end presence on hardware synths is subjectively better than it is on software synths.
Yeah. It's the real deep sounds of,
Yeah, there's a quality to it that I can't
yeah.
really put you can't analyze it on a scope, but they just somehow sound better.
I think that's the sound of capacitors, resistors, and amplifiers being operated at their
Mhm.
optimum performance levels. And when a synth is in that form, that's what we're hearing.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how much synthesizers are worth now as we go through time. As I said, I picked up a CS80 in 1994 for $200. off a guy that dropped it by the studio one day and said, "It's too heavy. I don't want to lug it around anymore." It was a guy that used to
Yes,
play in a
80.
rock band. Yeah, it's a guy that used to play in a rock band, Don, called Dirty Diamond and the Coal Company. And I remember them clearly from the old days in the 70s. They had the whole rig, they had to do
Yeah.
Loverboy and all that stuff. So now to see the value of the CS80 is just ridiculous.
And do you still have it, by the way, or
Yes, I do. Yeah. And it's
have you
in perfect mint condition. So if you ever
and,
want to come by and jam on it, it's here.
and have you ever actually used it on one of your recordings?
Yes, Ryan Moore, whenever we get together, we've done 2 albums together as Dubcon. We
Yeah.
utilize it. It's our main synth in Dubcon.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a special one.
Yeah.
It's also
I've only played with the Arturia emulation of it, and obviously it's not the same, but my impression based on the Arturia one, I was going, I'm not
it's
sure
nice.
I get the what the buzz is.
Yeah. As I say, they don't make them like they used to. And then you find out later that they only made like 800 of those altogether. It's like you would have thought they would have made thousands. Nope.
But
That's
that's true of all of those things because I think the
yeah.
Prophet 5, I remember reading somewhere they only made about 5,000 of them.
Yeah, yeah. So there's nowhere near as many of these things around as we think there are.
Yeah.
And that's why the values, because also a lot of them aren't in working order anymore. So they think they've determined that there's like less than 300 working CS80s in the world left. So I have one of them.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it is awesome to hear you do your own singing and lyrics on this last album. Do you find it more liberating to be your own voice on your newest NUMB material? Do you write your songs first and add vocals later? Hey, there's a lot of questions there. Let's not like bombard Dawn. It's generally, how's your feelings about vocals? Being in
Um,
control of instead of having to work with somebody.
yeah, but there's a beauty in working with somebody else too, because they they bring an external quality to it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm
Dawn's getting tired here.
oh,
Guys gotta understand. It's like, what's it like 11:37 there?
oh, I'm not worried about that. That's not a problem.
Okay.
But no, so I think I'm more confident with my vocals now than I was 2 years ago
I
because
think
I've been doing more and trying different things, and it's Data Void has been a really good experiment for developing that further, and so yeah, I kind of and also whilst you might not when the old thing is like when you hear your voice recorded you go that doesn't sound like me, and when you first do that you go yeah okay, but once it's recorded and you start actually then cleaning it up a bit and adding EQ and all the rest of it, it suddenly becomes an abstraction. It's no longer you, and it's just this musical part, and once it's a musical part then it becomes something really exciting, and it's divorced from yourself in a way. I guess would be the best way to say it.
yeah, and you did a very good job too. So that's important to point out. Is it easier to just do that? And he says, I felt Conan Hunter's voice seemed to make NUMB songs more mysterious and suited the material well. Is it easier to just like not work with the idea of say how Conan Hunter may have sung versus how you want to integrate?
I think that's the beauty of working with other people. You work with the talent that they have,
Yeah,
and you create something special.
absolutely. Hope that answers your question there, Mr. Nick, and thank you for your question. Exit, finally your question. Hi, I overslept, but regarding the Atari ST Quest, blah, blah, blah. Okay, for Dawn, one of my favorite lines in that NUMB song, Reverent, is the line, the sky tastes steel. If so, I love the imagery. It paints skyscrapers in my mind. So where does that come from?
Yep, you'd have to ask Conan about that one.
Okay, well, that's a good question. When you don't really know what Conan means by that, it's maybe best left for interpretation.
Yeah, but I think that's always the way with lyrics. There's this con. I'm sure you come across this. I was first introduced to this when I was got into some of the teaching a French theorist called Foucault, and this idea that he put forward of the idea of the death of the author, which sounds all very, mysterious and pretentious. But really, what it basically says is the author may have one thing in mind, but ultimately, it's the person who's reading it who makes meaning. And so it doesn't really matter what it is you think you're saying. It's the person who reads it who is the important part of the
For
communication.
sure. Wow, Das Christoph says, sadly, the K27 can't sample and lacks a sample editing page. I didn't know that.
That's interesting.
I thought it incorporated everything from the previous. Well, there you go. Brr, gong.
Well, that won't be on your Christmas shopping list. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
it's off the Christmas shopping list. Dawn, thank you so much for hanging with us here today and chatting. And it's been wonderful to catch up with you. I want to catch up with you in person, though.
You know where to find us.
Hopefully there will be a possibility. And if you're ever in Los Angeles, come on by. And I'll hopefully if I find myself in Spain, I'll be calling you up.
Well,
But
or maybe we meet somewhere third party, like in Japan.
maybe in the middle.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. But I hope that we can see you touring, and looking forward to the new releases. And you've been busy as always. Thank you for dropping by with me today, and like to pass on a delightful Sunday evening to you there over in Spain. Everybody on the side here saying the same: Scully, Bird Spanker, Exit 99, Jason Pitt, Airspeed Grove, Roy Anderson, Das Christoph, all you guys, thanks for joining us here with Dawn. Don't forget, guys, what I said. Dawn is responsible for all this. So let's bow down to the king.
Not. Yeah. Anyways, no, it's been great, and it's been way too long. We'll have to do this more often for sure.
Big hugs to you, my friend. I hope to see you again soon. Let's stay in touch, all right?
Definitely.
All right. Later.
Have a great Sunday.